So on today's video, we have a wireless charging coil for an iPhone XR. This isn't something that you should really interact with all that much, unless, I mean, the only way that I see this happening is mainly from a botched back glass replacement. Or maybe you bought a phone and the previous individual, honestly, I see this a lot when people buy phones. They'll try to fix, or when they resell phones, they'll try to fix them for literally as cheap as they can. And essentially the next owner ends up unfortunately inheriting all these issues. So maybe your wireless charging coil doesn't work. Maybe if you're not sure why, or whatever, even if you are, I'm going to show you how to replace it. I will mention this is a board and battery out repair. So yeah, there are some tools that we're going to need, which I will go over now. In no particular order, we're going to need some drivers, a pentalobe, we're going to need a Phillips. There's a great toolkit that iFixit has, Y000. We're going to need one of these for quite a few of the screws. There's a standoff to get several of the screws that hold down the board, an opening tool, a nylon spudger, some tweezers. I use 91% alcohol to loosen up the battery adhesive. I'll show you that later. What else? Oh, also having a straight set of tweezers is nice to get out the battery tabs. What else am I missing? Magnetic mat to keep your screws in place. And I don't have one here, but I will by the end of the video. But there are these battery tabs that you can get. So if you're ordering one of these and you're watching this video ahead of time, I'd suggest getting one of a couple of things. You can get the perimeter gasket, as it's not a bad idea to replace it in the process. The other that I would suggest is battery adhesive strips, because we need to take out the battery. So we need something to adhere it with. I mean, there's nothing to stop you from just using double-sided tape, but if you repair your device a lot and you want to be able to get easy access to it a second time, maybe in the future, who knows, it's nice to just have the pull-away tabs. So like I said, I'll show you that later in the video. I don't have one on my table at this exact second, but with that said, let's get started. So I'm going to leave some links down below in the description for the tool set. Like I mentioned, you're going to have to get a standoff bit at minimum. So you can get that. Honestly, I forget which kit has it. I know it's not the basic one. It's whatever one above that. But we start off any repair with the pentalobes. Oh, heat source. I forgot to mention heat source. So I use a hot air gun, but essentially we just need something. It's not necessary, but on the assumption that if you're doing a screen replacement in this process, you don't need to take nearly as good care of your screen, but if you're going to reuse it, these bezels are a lot thicker, and sometimes if your adhesive is still pretty strong, it's not all that difficult to crack. I've done this 2 or 3 times, and it's annoying because then I obviously have to buy the customer a screen, and well, I wouldn't say obviously, but I have to buy the customer a screen, or choose to, might be a better way to say it. But we take our pry tool, and I usually just try to wedge it in. Now, just for context, you can kind of see right there, that's about as much as you want to insert. You don't want to stick it in the phone very far, especially once again, if we're reusing your screen. Your flexes are about right here for the LCD. If you don't like the sort of cutting motion, you can, the technique that I have is just to twist, and it lifts up on the screen. There are a couple of brackets up top. You can sort of wiggle them out. There's one like right here. And I'm going to mention this later in the video, but you want to make sure that your front camera didn't come out of place. It's rather common in the XR and 11 series that when you pull it out, it will like basically do this, and it doesn't look, to the untrained eye, I mean, essentially I broke a couple of screens before I figured out that this was a problem, but I would go to reseat the screen would be lifting up on the left side, and my natural, I'm inclined to just, when I see it, I would, you know, push down and then I would crack the display. So you want to make sure that it's, well, basically sitting in the right place so that we don't damage the screen. But I'll mention that right before at least I'll try to. I'll mention this ahead of time, but the first and the last thing that we disconnect in pretty much any phone, with a couple of exceptions in other models, but I won't talk about those. But in the XR, the first thing that you connect or disconnect is the battery. Just because the device is turned off doesn't mean that there's not electricity running through the phone. There's still electricity running through the board. And the last thing you want to do is short something out. So our battery is disconnected. There are a couple of ways you can do this, but there are safe zones. In this case, it could be right in front. As you saw, I lifted up on the side. We can use our pointed end of the spudger. Just like that. Take our screen, set it aside. Now, well, I like to start with so this isn't necessary, but I like to remove the Taptic engine. When I say it's not necessary, I mean, I've seen some people that when they do a battery replacement, or when they remove the battery and they pull the battery tabs, they don't. In my opinion, that's just, at least for the untrained individual, even for me, and I do this for a living, I prefer the sort of surefire way to make sure that I'm not going to damage my, for anyone that's done a battery replacement or pulled out a battery, the battery tabs can be a pain in the neck, which is, like I mentioned earlier in the video, what the isopropyl alcohol is for. I don't think I mentioned this, but you want to avoid 70%, as the alcohol content just isn't high enough. You could potentially damage the phone, the board. But really all we need is just about 2 drops. I use 99%, but 91 works perfectly fine. I also wiggle back and forth. If it starts to tear, well, just stop and you can start on another battery tab. Another technique that I have is I'll wrap around my tweezers, which is, like I said, why I like using straight tweezers pretty much for just the battery tabs, and then I use the curved tweezers for everything else. Next up, these tabs are a little bit tighter. So I grab the end. Now, you do want to make sure, obviously we can see that our Face ID flex is right here, which is one more reason that I like using alcohol, as it just takes away a lot of the adhesive stickiness so it doesn't grab onto anything. Because if we damage a battery, batteries are cheap. If you damage Face ID, well, you're out of luck. It's not something that can be replaced. Let's say this, once I didn't want to grab on there, mainly because of the alcohol. There we go. Done. Here's the battery. Take our battery, set it aside. Take our Taptic engine, reinstall. Now, you do want to make sure that your Taptic engine screws are tight, as if you don't tighten them, inevitably they will come unthreaded, and then they'll just be rattling around. Your Taptic engine will be rattling around inside your phone. Now, you don't technically have to remove your Face ID. I mean, you need to disconnect it. You could just leave it in place, but it really doesn't take much effort, and it definitely makes it easier getting the board in and out when there aren't as many flexes in the way. Now, if this is something that you're doing all in one stretch, you know, maybe less than an hour, or however long this video is, should be less than an hour, then you can just leave your Face ID out. But if you're like me and you're paranoid, I'd put it in a bag, as if you get dust or debris or, I don't know, something on it, it's not very easy to clean off. Just put it that way. So now begins the tedious process of board out. Once again, just like the Face ID, this isn't entirely necessary, but as the camera is literally just 2 screws and a plate, we're going to do the same thing. Get our little baggie. Camera. And bam, done. We can disconnect our cables. So that's all of our flexes. We can now start with our standoff. And that's that. Now, you do have to get past, you don't actually have to remove it, but you do have to get past this little bracket right here. There's an overhang from the SIM tray, but you can just slide the board out just like that. Take that, set it aside. There's this. You can keep it, you can throw it out, does not really matter. We then have 2 screws. Now, if you want, you can remove the SIM tray, pull out the SIM assembly, and then you can sort of tape back your, just if you want to get this flex as far away from this as possible. It's not really necessary though. For the next step, we are going to need a bunch of, not a bunch, we're going to need heat. There are essentially some adhesive strips here. They're not the pull tab type. They're just, you warm them up, and then I'll show you obviously just a sec. But they're just in the corners. So it's just a matter of once again, if your wireless charger doesn't actually work, then it's not the end of the world if you, obviously, if you tear it. So as far as I'm concerned, use as much force as you like. As for me, usually I do this when I'm doing a board out repair, when I'm doing a housing replacement. Once you get to about here, you can sort of just lift up. And as we can see, the adhesive is just all this stuff. Once again, if you're watching this ahead of time, or where this black outline is. And that's it. Now begins the reinstall. So now for the reinstall. We have our battery. Tuck this in. These are the battery tabs, adhesive strips I was mentioning. You don't have to get it exact. This is only compounded by, there we go. Not bad. Now we're gonna wait to reinstall this, obviously. So we haven't even installed our wireless charger. So we take our coil, now depending on where you get your part from, some of them come with new adhesive, in which case you can just heat up the back of the device, and then you can use your spudger, and you can sort of peel away all this adhesive. But some of them, like I see these a lot on eBay, where you have I mean, honestly, I tend to do this from time to time, where I don't know, I bought a phone off of somebody and then it had an issue, so I can't resell it, so I'm just slowly parting out the phone. So I do that from time to time. So but yeah, if you're just if you don't have, let me see, where did it end up? Like, this is a new piece, and you can see all this, just like the battery, it has this plastic on it and new adhesive. But if you're, like, let's just say you bought one that was from eBay, there's no parts or whatever, or there's no adhesive strips. Honestly, there's enough sticky for it to hold in place, considering that it's not actually moving or doing anything. And by the time you actually drop the battery in place, I actually don't find it all that necessary to have a go at me. Have a go at me in the comments if you think I'm wrong. But like I said, it's not a part that's actually moving, so needing adhesive is not entirely necessary because there's enough pressure, downward pressure from the battery, and then sort of sticky residue from the old adhesive to keep it in place. Now, we need to get past this little ring right here. And then the next piece is that. And then we can I will lightly screw this in, so I don't tighten it all the way until I know that the rest of them are aligned properly. But then I come back with my standoff. If you loosened your SIM tray assembly like I did, make sure to tighten it. Now we can begin reconnecting our flexes. Now on the charging port, try not to press down in the immediate center. Some of the wider flexes have a tendency to bow, which is no good, so don't do that. Usually press down on just one side and then the other is the best way to do it. Now for our rear camera, make sure that there's no dust that accidentally ended up in your little housing area. And then our Face ID. There is a little bracket right here, which we need to get this little piece under so that it seats properly. And then same thing, you can see on I'll try to get a white background, but you can see right here, it's almost like that needs to fit within this right here. So they sort of slot in just like that. And to briefly mention this in the beginning, I'll mention it a third time when I reinstall the screen, but you want to make sure that essentially this sort of floor right here is below where the bezel sits, or else you're going to crack your display, which is no good, obviously. So now that we have that, take our battery. I don't think it is, but we need to make sure that our adhesive, it sticks to the battery properly. You can see it sort of change color. Now the technique that I have, don't just drop your battery in, because what can happen is if you only have so much room up or down on this particular connector. And if it's too high or too low, it is incredibly annoying because then you have to pull the battery out. So usually what I do is I connect the battery. That way I know that the flex is in the proper orientation. Press down. And then, like I said, disconnect the battery because you don't want your battery connected to the board when we are connecting and or disconnecting anything. Now, just for the sake of being thorough, usually if there's enough, I had somebody ask me this in one of my other videos where he asked if I didn't or why I didn't reinstall a gasket. And my answer is pretty much the same answer that it's going to be right now, which is your phone is not water resistant, usually long before it's damaged or broken or opened. These seals don't hold up nearly as well as people think they do. So if there's one reason that you're reinstalling a gasket, it's typically the one reason that I do. Is like you can see that there's all of this adhesive here. The gasket has three jobs. One is, the first and second are dust and water resistance. The second is, the first and second. And the third is to keep the screen from sort of tapping against the bezel. And I've seen this happen many times, where I open up a phone, I'm going to do a screen replacement, and the customer mentions, oh, by the way, my screen does this, not sure why, and then I open it up to find out that there's no adhesive. So if you have the majority of your adhesive still remaining, honestly, I would just leave it as it's just easier. There's less work to do. But if you want to replace it, these are relatively inexpensive. Get the nicer 3-layer one. First layer I just removed. The second I'll remove in just a second. The third one lays in place until you connect your screen. It's not a bad idea to get more than one of these, as they are not all that expensive and they are easy to misalign or not install properly. Or sometimes you'll align it properly and do all of this, and here's the second layer. And then when you finally at last remove the third layer, sometimes the adhesive will come up with it, which is one more reason why it's not all that bad of an idea to just keep your existing adhesive if the majority of it is there. Like I said, make sure your battery is disconnected. Now, what I like doing from here is just turning on the phone and then testing the functionality of everything. If something doesn't work, well, I'm gonna have to take it apart. It makes sense to have less stuff to pull out in the screen. You know, I don't have to pull the screen off. It's just easier that way. but do what you will, do what you want. But as we can see, there you go, wireless charging. Now, it's not a bad idea because you removed the board to test literally everything else on the phone. So you can test button functionality, switch, flash. I mean, literally any flex cable that you removed or that you disconnected, which in this case is basically every single one of them. And if something doesn't work, it looks like that because it's not fully seated. That's that. And then you can check Face ID functionality, which works. Test, 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 test. Test, 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 test. So, I mean, essentially everything works. So now we can put our remaining screws and plates back on. Now, last but not least, well, actually not last. Last would be the pentalobes. So we have pull it gently. And if it starts to lift at any point, just apply some pressure, like use the flat side of your spudger, sort of apply some pressure just to keep it, like that was lifting that and inevitably would have come up, like this is doing literally right here. Like it's doing right here. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, pretty much once you finally seat the screen, it'll remain in place. Like I said, your phone isn't water resistant anymore, but it will keep dust out, especially up here, so that your Face ID camera components don't get dusty and stop working. And then also, like I said, it keeps your screen from tapping up against your housing. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment down below if you enjoyed the video, or if, let me know how your repair turned out. And if there's anything you think I missed, share, feel free to share. If you have any questions about the repair, I usually respond to comments pretty soon, or as quickly as I get to them. So with that said, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.